she produces it.
I like to go into something not knowing if I can pull it off. I'm not really interested in safety.
I saw Liberties Taken one summer night in 1985 and knew that I was looking at something brand new that had never happened before in the American theater.
It was a little before its time, I think. The form, the idea that 15 people could play 200 parts by switching masks and using puppets, it wasn't something that people knew would work. What I enjoy about the Lion King experience is that an entire generation of young people's first theatrical experience is something that is abstract. It's abstract. It's highly theatrical. It's not anything like television or film. An inanimate object is given life by the genius of the artist, of the actor, the puppeteer. It has life and soul and spirit, and yet we know it's an object. The audience is a participant in the action because they fill in the blanks. But I don't want it to be so stylized that you don't feel anything. That's the big danger. Oh, symbolism, it's so distancing. No, no, no. You should be moved to tears. What is odd is that I am a very controlling kind of director, and yet there's something very attractive about this form that allows for the real true collaboration of the actors.
She really gives this incredible license. For instance, she and I and Derek have come up with a lot of the scene material ourselves through rehearsal and through improvisation.
You know what I would like? Oh, I would love to have my thing. What thing? My thing I like. What sits on my head, you know, my king thing. The crow! The crow! Unless someone else.
I want the personality of each actor to come out. So the mask helps you look inside. It's a catalyst to get at a different part of your personality. Torture him with the handkerchief in his face and then blow your nose in it.
You know I have abandonment issues. Oh, tissues? Issues. Oh, God bless you. Thank you.
6, 7, 8, 9. Hush. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It's wonderful to work with directors who are auteur directors. You know when you're working with them, you're working with them and not a committee or not with someone else.
The carnival mass. What is carnival about? It's about the underbelly of the human being. It's a theme that I've worked with over and over and over again.
Over this movie is just really a total influence in a sense, all-encompassing. Almost in every way, you feel her presence and you feel her stamp. What Julie portrayed was something quite human, but I think she made quite a breakthrough in how the paintings came to life.
Dios, dame fuerza, que me estoy muriendo por irla a buscar.
One, go! The reason I picked that technique of using puppets to be the large kings and his ministers and ladies was it allowed the audience to identify with the only real human beings, forced them by isolating the dwarves. Michael Anderson, who played Hot Frog, said this is the first time where he was the human and not the special effect, and where he was surrounded by these grotesques and he wasn't the grotesque. And that was incredible. Sung by the human beings, it forces you to identify with the monster who sings and speaks in contemporary English. In our society right now, especially as Americans, we should be looking at ourselves from the outside. The monster is us.
I want you. I want you so bad.
I think transformation becomes the main word in my life, because you don't want to just put a mirror in front of people and say, here, look at yourself. What do you see? You want to have a skewed mirror. You want a mirror that says, you didn't know you could see the back of your head, because you look at your own country, your own culture completely differently. Just went down. What that riot is and what happened at that point.
When I find myself in times of trouble,
you throw up images that are familiar to people, but the context is what makes people see them differently. All of a sudden you're asking them not to take it for granted in a way that they're used to seeing on the 6 o'clock news. So you see it with fresh eyes, and therefore fresh mind and fresh heart. And hopefully change a little. You're transformed. Theater of violence. I wanted to deal with the violence on 2 levels, so that you don't become numb by the elegant beauty of the stylization, and you don't become numb from the visceral reality, which is what we do on television. I wanted to work with great language. I wanted to work with superb actors. If you get up and it's her, you know. Okay, so what does she want? So that she can just kind of play around you a little bit more.
the snake lies.
So why don't you pull him down on top and just like be in her ear saying, the Venus govern your desire, and then get back up again.
This is a nurse's song lullaby to bring her maid to sleep.
Madam, though Venus govern your desires, Saturn is dominator over mine.
I always find that if it's a great artist, they're willing to take chances. And I'm sure at times Hopkins felt that I was stepping over the line.
I just had to slug it out with her. It was worth it. I think it's a remarkable film, one of the best Shakespearean films I've seen.
For 220 sons I never wept, because they died, and others left me dead. But these, tributes in the dust I write, my heart's deep languor, and my soul's sad tears, let my tears, staunch tears, dry overnight, my son's sweet blood, will make it shame and blush.
The end of this film, with the child leaving the Colosseum, is what it's all about. He has been there, he was a participant, he saw the horror, it's his family, it's his blood, and yet he's made a choice now, this 12-year-old boy, to leave the killing field. I didn't want to tell the story if I didn't have that one sliver of hope. Trying to do everything in live theater that you can't do in 2 dimensions, in film and television. Oh my God! Wow!
So much fun.
Yeah, I'll do it.
If I give enough movement in this culture, and the actor moves their head, you feel like it's alive.
It's really comic book live. It's a comic book coming alive.
I'm understanding now your goal here was to make a movie in the most extreme locations as possible.
Just look at that stuff. But no artist can achieve what nature does by itself, right? Through its own rage.
The rawness and the violence of the nature here, it's fantastical, it's primeval, but it's just extraordinary for the play. I can't imagine any corner of the earth that would be more perfect.
Ariel! Oh, my pencil blaster. Here I am.
It is empty! And all the devils are here!
What Shakespeare suggested, I just did. He was the director. He said, this is what Ariel can do. And frankly, Shakespeare wrote a visual effects piece.
I will fling them all, even to roaring.
Your charms so strongly worksome that if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender. Dost thou think so, spirit? My word, master. Were I human,
I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous wind. To the dread rattling thunder have I given fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. But this rough magic I here abjure.
We look at our cruelty, we look at the darkness and the horrific events that happen in our lives, and then you find this ability to transcend. You always look for the beauty. You always look for the beauty, because that is the only godlike thing in being human. We all have a different idea about what that is, but the fact that we are capable of appreciating and creating something that moves our spirit is the only thing that keeps me going.
I know that when I look back on it, it will be one of the most important experiences of my life.
I think she's going to be around as a pretty formidable director for a long time.
Muy buenas tardes, presentamos a Julie Taymor. Señor Víctor Zapatero, director de escénica de GIFF, me va a acompañar en las preguntas. Buenas tardes. Hola. Un comentario para los que va a ser en inglés. Hay traducción simultánea afuera que pueden rentar los equipos. Entonces, cualquier persona que requiere traducción simultánea pueden acudir al lobby. Gracias. Julie, you were born in Newton, Massachusetts, and as a teenager in the 60s, you traveled to places like Sri Lanka, India, Paris, and later in the 70s to Japan and Indonesia. How did these experiences shape your worldview?
Well, I think it's really important as an artist to be able to step outside of your own neighborhood, of your own culture, and even see that culture from abroad. So by traveling at a very young age, I had a different feeling about my own world that I was brought up in the United States and my culture, but also I had tremendous inspiration, especially in the theater, by going to Asia in particular and seeing theater in its original form, because there wasn't, when I went to Japan, India, Indonesia, there wasn't a lot of film or television. I'm that old. So it was amazing to see how theater was the absolute most important art form in these communities. And tremendous, you can see it in my work, you can see in the inspiration of Oedipus Rex and The Lion King, that those productions, that's not African theater, The Lion King, but it's very inspired by masks and the use of puppetry in many different cultures. And I think as an artist, what you do is you absorb, and it comes in your eyes, goes down into your heart, explodes in your head, and then hopefully comes out in a fresh, original, personal form.
Thank you. Sir, you seem to be a tireless traveler because you don't just travel for pleasure. I don't know how many productions of The Lion King have they opened so far?
Well, what was it? We started 15 years ago, so it'll be 15 years in November. 15 productions, and I'm on my way to Brazil in October. We have a new one in Great Britain opening in September, and I know it came to Mexico City, but not in Spanish yet. So it's in Madrid in Spanish right now.
With a Mexican actor you mentioned?
Yes.
Do you know the name of the actor?
Carlos, big singer, I don't know his last name right now, but.
So is travel a big part of your research and your inspiration?
I think each project requires its own research. But if you look at many of my projects, they don't take place in America. A lot of them don't. So I shot, obviously, Frida in Mexico, all of it, New York City, Paris, everything was done in Mexico. We had a limited budget, and you get very creative with a limited budget, you have to be. And then Titus was shot in Italy, and as you saw in some of that imagery, we used the ruins of Rome and Croatia. We only found a Colosseum to do that original opening in Croatia. And at that time it was Bosnia, the war was ending or almost ending, and so it had incredible power because it was living then, the cruelty, the violence, the warfare. And now Elliot and I are making a film that will take place in New York and India. So we've traveled to India this year for a conference, but also to do research, and we'll go back and shoot. So it's because I'm interested in stories that are not just about me and my culture that brings me out. And I studied in Paris when I was 16. I studied at École de Mime Jacques Lecoq, which was a great, I had been an actress when I was really young, 11. And I did experimental theater in the early 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, and I wanted a physical discipline. So by studying mime and movement, it was an incredible grounding for my work as a director, understanding the power of gesture, the power of the body, and I got a lot of that out of Paris, and also I studied masks. And so, yeah, it's been very important for each piece to go to where you have to shoot it or where it's going to inspire you. Juan Darien, which you saw up there, is a carnival mask. It mixes the sacred and the profane, very high, very low, which we feel when we've traveled through Mexico, Elliot and I are very inspired by that. You know, the Virgin of Guadalupe in the middle of a carnival. You know, it's very powerful imagery. And it's a Horacia Quiroga story, Uruguayan story. But we worked on it in Mexico. We were traveling in Chiapas and Oaxaca. And so if you see it, you'll see a lot of inspiration from not just Diego Rivera, but many of obviously the Day of the Dead, and the muralists and the painters, Morales and Tamayo, and many painters whom I adore. So that was it, and it's all in Latin and Spanish. And it's been done in the theater in many, many places. Not here, unfortunately, but being in Mexico to create that was absolutely essential.
Julie, can you please tell us about the ritual that you witnessed in Indonesia?
Yes, ritual. Want to translate or do you have to say it? No? Okay. So the witness of the ritual. If you've been in theater all your life, from 8 years old or on, I was in theater, to go to a place where, for instance in Bali, where there is no name, no word for artist, that what a tailor or a farmer or a teacher or a seamstress does is that they do their work and they also dance and they also play music. And it's an incredible thing to see that, because it's as important to them to put on these ceremonies, which are plays. Plays are done as ceremonial traditionally. And it would be the same in many parts of the world here as well. But it's as important as eating and drinking. So for me, coming from a culture where theater is considered entertainment, it's leisure activity, it was so inspiring at age 21 to be in a culture that felt it to be as fundamental to your life as anything else, that you must do, that you have to do it. So it was great to watch productions, mask performances being prepared, because you'd be in a village and they would invite great dancers or mask performers to come from different villages. Of course, those people were also farmers and tailors, but they would come and they would do these epic plays from the Mahabharata or Ramayana, which is like our Shakespeare or our Greek theater in the West, or Cervantes or Shakespeare. And they would improvise 9 hours. But in the beginning, part of getting prepared would be ritualistic, how the flowers were laced onto these sticks and then put on the headdresses, and the actors would discuss their parts, and then the children would sit on the laps of their fathers as the gamelan orchestra was playing. And this ritual of going to theater all night is an experience not of just being entertained, but it is where romance happens. It's where philosophy is discussed. It's where the clowns, like in Shakespeare, will criticize the fact that a big factory is taking over this farmer's land and he's losing his land. So even though it's a traditional ancient story, the clowns are always contemporary. They're always in the colloquial, contemporary language. This was incredibly inspiring, and the fact that it would be 9 hours of improvisation was amazing to me.
Did you see a special ceremony? I listened to you.
Yes, I can tell you a big ceremony. Yes?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
We have time.
You know the story. So I had a fellowship in Indonesia in visual theater and experimental puppet theater, not just of Indonesia, but Eastern Europe and Japan, where I was going to study the folk bunraku. And bunraku is when you have three people manipulating the puppet. So I was very interested in the power of visual theater because it transcends boundaries. That theater without words, that has powerful imagery through music and imagery, it could be playing anywhere. So I went to Indonesia for 3 months and stayed 4 years. And after 2 years, I was 21 years old, after 2 years I decided to start my own theater company. And I had done a play with a group of Indonesian dancers and actors and musicians, and one Frenchman who was a gypsy from Algeria who had been in Bali, dropped himself from a helicopter, I think, this is his story, into the jungles of Sumatra, made his way to Bali, spoke perfect Balinese, I spoke Indonesian, and we met, and he was gay and very feminine, and because I'm much bigger than most of the Balinese, I was the masculine. So after we performed one play, and I also performed and directed, we went to a place up in the mountains by a living volcano called Trunyan, which is a village that's considered the original Balinese. The original Balinese were grown there. They didn't come from India. They came from the water. And in this village, every 5 years was a ceremony to initiate the young men into adulthood. This is a common ritual in every culture, which, bar mitzvah and Jewish, each one has a ceremony for children to become adults, like quince. So I went, there's many stories, but the one I'll tell you today is it was nighttime in this village, and I was alone. Yeoman Roland, the Frenchman, went off one way. I was glad he was gone. And I was sitting in a village square, in a temple square, big square, as big as this theater, under a giant banyan tree, which you have here, with the roots going into the ground. And it was a full moon and no electricity, so the square was empty, and I was tired and under the tree. And I was listening to many gamelan orchestras from many villages that had come, and they all were overlapping. It was a beautiful score of music. And I thought I was alone and restful and peaceful. And all of a sudden, at the far end of the square, I saw light bouncing off of mirrors. And then I could see, very vaguely, about 20 old men in full warrior costume with mirrors all over their costumes and big spears. There was nobody in the square. And these 20 men came out, and they performed for about 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. A full warrior dance, only lit by the moon. They didn't see me. I could see them, because I was hidden in the shadows. And I was so moved and shocked. It was one of these seminal, important moments in your life where you say, who are they performing for? And I'm not religious by organized religion, but I think art is my religion. But I understand that whatever God means to you, that's what they were performing for. And the detail of their costumes and the sounds, they were moving along, and they were all men. It had an incredible intensity as they danced. And from the deepest source of their life source, these sounds would come out. And I just watched and marveled. And in a moment after they finished, they disappeared in the shadows. And at that moment, a young man came out, and he put up a curtain on bamboo poles, and he hung up a propane lantern. And the village square, the temple square, filled with hundreds of young people and families and children. And they had to have the light, the man-made light, because human beings can't see without the light. And then for 9 hours, they performed a full opera. And so I saw those people had audience, they had laughing, they had clapping, they made money. But the first people they were doing it for something else. Not just for themselves, but whatever that means to you. It can be personal for every artist. So that experience for me was so critical in my growth that when I came back and did something, the very low budget to the very high budget I've done, I bring that. For instance, the costumes of the Lion King, which you saw. The lionesses wear corsets. They're like Maasai corsets from Africa. And they're made of beads and glass and shells, cowrie shells. But they're real. They're not plastic. They're not rubber. Now, probably 20 feet away in the audience, you wouldn't know the difference. But the actresses wearing them know the difference. The feel of it, the weight, and every piece of fabric is hand-painted or hand block printed. And it's not that that's more expensive. It is more time-consuming, but I will tell you, the artists who created those corsets, the tailors and the seamstresses and the artists who painted the cloth, their spirit went into that, into those pieces, and that comes on stage. There's nothing fake. There's nothing ersatz about it. And I know that came from my very young time when I was in Indonesia and Japan and saw how the no-mask carver in Japan, who makes the masks for the No Theater, would lay out his paintbrushes, how he would prepare before he would paint the masks, how his workshop was laid out. When we traveled with my theater company in Indonesia, the wooden masks would have to have their head toward the north and the chin to the south, and you had to have a blessing before every performance. And that really transformed me as an artist, and helped me, actually, a lot.
So, you studied theater and graduated with a degree in folklore and mythology, correct? Is there a little bit of ancient and classical mythology in everything you do?
Is there ancient classical? I think what you can see in my work is I like to blend collision of culture and collision of storytelling. So it's not always mythology, but sometimes it's just inner world, outer. I think Frida, the movie Frida, is not mythology, but it is about what is an inner landscape that is colliding with the exterior landscape, because Frida was painting both her inner and outer landscape. So when the paintings came alive, they were trying to express the emotion of what it was for Frida to experience those moments. Her paintings are biographical. So I'm not guessing on what her experiences were. Like many artists, you have no idea why they painted. Frida, you know why. She painted her experience. So as an artist, for me, it was easier to do her story. But then there are many other ones, like Grendel, the opera that Elliot Goldenthal and I did. You saw a big opera, Grendel. That is the ancient myth of Beowulf, which is the monster. It's a big monster story, inspired Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, all of that comes from those stories, and also Wagner, inspired by the monster and Siegfried fighting. Beowulf, the hero, fights. But Elliot and I decided to do it very much from the monster's point of view, which was based on a novel written in the 1960s by John Gardner. So the opera itself the monster spoke in the language, sang in a language that the audience understood. And the chorus, which were the humans, they spoke in ancient language, Old English, that no one understands. So the audience had to identify with the monster. Now you see that in Juan Darien, you see it in Fool's Fire, which is the Edgar Allan Poe film, my very first film. It was an hour long. And you identify with the dwarf actor because all the other characters are puppets. They're grotesque puppets. So I like that kind of use of technology or technique to tell the story, but also to clash worlds. There is naturalism in Across the Universe, which I think is probably seen more than any of the other films, maybe Frida in this crowd, but Across the Universe. It's very real when you're in Brookline, Mass, or on the streets of New York, or trying to be real in Vietnam, although we shot it in New Jersey. But, it's trying to be maybe not pure naturalism, but more naturalistic. But then because it is a musical, the form allows me to be completely completely whacked out creative in the songs. Because songs, like in opera and musicals, are not reality. I'm not going to sit here and sing, if I fell in love with you, would you promise to be true? Well, maybe I would, but... I think what it was so exciting about the opportunity to do the Beatles musical is that you have the ability to use all the technology, very low tech and high tech, to create the imagery for the songs, like Strawberry Fields or I Want You. And I used everything, dance, sing, it's really made for a movie.
Can you tell us a little bit about the time you spent at the Cinémathèque Française?
In Paris?
In Paris, correct. And what did you see? What were your references and influences? And
yes.
What did you take from them?
Well, when I was 16, I graduated high school early and went to Paris, as I said, to study mime. And I didn't speak French well, which wasn't a problem in mime school. But I would spend all my free time at the Cinémathèque in Paris, where they had all the great films from around the world. And in particular, my strongest memory is seeing Rashomon, early Kurosawa film, black and white, beautiful film, which not just the filmmaking in Toshiro Mifune, who I fell in love with, but also the fact that it was told from 3 different points of view. I love that. I think this idea of being able to see the same story from different perspective was very inspired by the story of Rashomon and how Kurosawa told it. So I love Kurosawa. It was the first time I was exposed to Cocteau or Fellini, and then Méliès, Murnau, Fritz Lang, and these early filmmakers. The earliest filmmakers really were artists. They really painted their frames. And von Sternberg, I'm very much into right now. Some of the silent films were much more creative to me than contemporary movies. Much more exciting. If I want to see something that's so realistic, you can turn on television. It seems to me that films have the opportunity to really be more poetic and still move you to tears and inspire you. So that exposure when I was 15, 16 in Paris to those great artists made me want to make films. I didn't. I stayed in the theater for many reasons, but those movies never left me.
You've worked in theater, puppetry, opera, film. Am I missing something? What has been the most fulfilling?
What is the most fulfilling between theater, opera, and film?
If you had to pick between these genres, do you have a favorite that you keep going back to, or?
Each one has something that I love that the other one doesn't. For instance, the intimacy of live theater. Even if it's The Lion King, it's still intimate when you're making it, because you're with a certain number of people in a rehearsal room, and the clock isn't really ticking like it is in film, because there's less people, less money while you're doing it. And it's very exciting to improvise with the actors and have that 6 to 8 weeks to develop it, and, well, that's rehearsal. You develop it for 2 years before that. But I love that intimacy. And I love the limitations of theater. They're very exciting, even if you can use, like, Spider-Man, which is the most, whatever, expensive and all of that, but it uses highly low tech. You saw the big image of a loom that was being created. That is human beings on yellow ribbons and wires. Literally, if they don't swing right, when that centerpiece of fabric goes up, they get stuck. It is human. It's not something that you can make work, and it doesn't work all the time. And there are many things about that. It requires great dancers. And I don't care if it's low budget or high budget, because in Lion King, one of the best images after the opening, which is so huge and the animals come down the aisles, is a little shadow puppet of a mouse with a little, almost a flashlight behind it, moving across the shadow screen. It costs 10 cents, It doesn't cost anything. It's the idea. And why it works so well is because it is juxtaposed to what came before. When you go from something that is so huge and overwhelming and people are looking everywhere and they're screaming or clapping, how do you get their focus to go to the next scene? In a film, if you have a wide shot, you go to a close-up. It's very manipulated. With the director, the DP, we can go. But with theater, you have to use lighting. Lighting, scale, and we move from big space to push it right up to the front of the house. So this is what I love about theater. I love having to find the way to do a stampede on stage. How do you do a stampede? I don't think there was imagery, but if you've seen Lion King, it's the most fun to figure out how to do it without projections. But then, when I do cinema, I love how to figure out the transitions. Many times people just cut from one scene to another, just cut. But if you look at Titus, it's very, very interesting ways that we move from one scene to another. Many filmmakers do that, but it's things I cannot do in the theater, because in the theater you can't move that quickly. So I could have Alan coming in a bathrobe, going down into the Senate, having a full rage, in a bathrobe, running around, and as he comes through the door, he's in a suit, without a cut. Just the door, well, it is a cut, but it seems continuous. It feels continuous. And that's fun, because then you know the movement is continuous, but time has been jumped, because he's dressed in different. So using the medium to all the animation, I love to play with Brothers Quaid did the animation in Frida of the skeletons in the hospital sequence, and 2 dimensions. When in Frida, for instance, in Frida, they're supposed to walk in New York City on 5th Avenue. In the script, they take a walk. Diego and Frida walk past all the shops, looking at the shops, and we're going, we can't shoot that in Mexico City. It doesn't look like New York, but we can't go to New York. So instead, we decided to use black and white photographs, many of them, and made a collage in the Frida style and Diego style. You see in their paintings, you see collage in Frida. Beautiful collage, work of collage. So using her style, being true to her, we had Diego and Frida walking through a collage. And that is a solution that is cinematic. I can't do that in the theater. I do it differently in the theater. And opera is a whole nother kettle of fish, because opera means big work. And Elliot Goldenthal and I, who have worked, you'll hear him this afternoon when you come back. He is a composer who did all my films, did the arrangements to the Beatles. He and I have created 20 theater productions, and we did Grendel. What I love about opera is it starts with the music. The music is the most important, and then I get inspired to direct and design, or design with other people to that. And you get forces of scale. You know, it's very, very fun that way. Also the time in the opera, no? With the music. Yeah. The time is perfect. It's all. Yes, it's kind of hidden. When I did the Magic Flute, which you saw here at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and it's there every year. Every 2 years now, it's in a full 3-hour German and a 2-hour English version. And I couldn't believe it, because we had to do the lighting. We had to do all the lighting, the technical rehearsal on the stage with the movement of the sets before we rehearsed. It's ass backwards for a director, because usually you want to work with the performers, and then that tells you, but because it's so big and difficult to find the time in the schedule with the opera, you have to do it first. So you're doing it to tape, and all the scenery has to move. But I enjoyed it. It was a discipline I'd never done before.
Excellent. What do you think about the film? Sometimes they are using more and more special effects. What is happening today in theater? Where is it going?
Well, I think there's great theater all over the world. We went to Colombia, Bogota, to the International Theater Festival 2 years ago, and the best theater we saw came from a province in England. It wasn't from London, and it was great theater that had the performers who could use their bodies, Japanese, English, South American performers who were Israeli, who were just tremendous physical actors. It was not naturalistic or realistic theater. I don't care much for absolutely realistic theater. I think that if you're going to do that, then I almost want my camera to be close. Not that it doesn't work, I think there's room for everything, but I think the poetry of live theater, that it can be stylized, is why you would want to see it. You can see on television, telenovelas, whatever, you can see real living rooms, kitchens, bathrooms. Now go to the theater to see something, to see an actor create all of the space, to create all of the landscape, or create it out of stylized versions, like our version of New York City in Spider-Man is all flat. It's all flat, but it's forced perspective, and you saw one image where you're looking from the top of the building down the streets to little taxis, and we had teeny little taxis on wires moving across. So you change the perspective. It's not quite the same in film. Film, you've seen it from an airplane, or if you've been on an airplane, but it's still not that kind of imagery. So I think that theater allows you to play with imagery in a very creative way. Film can too, but people aren't doing it as much as they used to.
Do you have some new production that you particularly enjoy or admire?
You mean that I'm doing now?
No, not yours.
Oh, mine. Oh, not mine.
Not yours.
Theater? Well, the one in Bogota was the best thing I've seen. Gecko. No, the theater was Gecko. The theater company is Gecko, and the, what's the company? Elliot, are you there? What? Oh, it was Bulgakov? Was it Bulgakov, The Overcoat? Yes. That was the play, The Overcoat. Thank you. It's great. You can look on YouTube and see pieces of it. But it was live theater, so it's not as good on YouTube. It doesn't work as well.
So you've written, you directed, you choreographed, you design puppets, you design masks, costumes, stage sets, you write music?
No, I don't write music.
You don't write music?
No. I have a composer I live with.
Oh, yeah.
I don't choreograph. I do movement because I am a mover and I study. But I like to work with choreographers. If, like across the university, Danny Ezra worked with me. He worked in Green Bird. He did Spider-Man with me. In Japan, the Oedipus Rex, Suzushi Hanayagi, who is a very famous older dancer who trained Robert Wilson. His movement came from Suzushi. And Min Tanaka, I worked with him. Min Tanaka was the Buto performer in Oedipus. I like to have a collaborative relationship with choreographers.
Is there any one of those chores that you enjoy doing the most, or is the director
I like
see?
sculpting. I like sculpting because there's nobody else about. And it's just me and the clay. The dialogue is with me and the clay, and it's talking to me. I love it because it's happening at that moment, and really it just is. But I love directing, as you saw with those actors in Green Bird, the Commedia dell'arte. There's nothing more fun than having an idea and then having your collaborators take it to a place you hadn't thought of. That's pure joy. Hitchcock says it's all over after he's storyboarded and finished. It's finished.
You wish he didn't have to shoot the movie.
He doesn't want to have to shoot the film. I don't feel that way. I want to have, as you said, I want the surprise. When you say the word danger, what you mean by that is if you know everything ahead of time and you've seen it before, so why are you doing it? I really enjoy creating something, as I said on the tape, that I'm not absolutely sure how it's going to come out. And quite often, it is better than you could imagine. And that's because there are many people who are hopefully talented that you've hired, who are working with you and help realize it and take it to another step.
Talking about your collaborators, costume designer, set designer, producer, what role does the lighting designer have in your theater?
Well, the lighting designer, I've worked with the same lighting designer for 15 years now, Don Holder, and he is phenomenal because lighting is so subtle, and his work with me is very different than his work with other artists. He's more garish with other artists. He uses pinks and bright, and he always comes and laughs and he says, well, I know it wasn't your style, Julie, I know. So he and I are so close now that it's shorthand. He knows what my taste is. He He knows if the lighting changes. So we have a very, very good relationship, and I want to give him enough time because I think lighting is such an important part of well, not just theater, of film as well, but that is the DP's job in film. So in lighting, you can see it. As I said, lighting will give you the emotion and will focus where the audience has to look. So if you're in a giant house like the Metropolitan Opera, how do you give focus to a single singer so that they're not lost in this vast space, like the lighting? And it's not just a follow spot. Although in the theater opera, it's often a follow spot, which is because opera singers just move where they want to move. But in theater that you really rehearse in tech, the actors go and it can be right on the hand. Robert Wilson is the most specific, and the actor will pick their hand up here and just the hand will be lit.
Do you have some special director for theater, or not, like Robert Wilson's another?
That I like?
Yeah.
Yes, I loved many years ago Ariana Minushkin, her work in Teatro du Soleil. When I lived in Indonesia, she was also developing her theater, Shakespeare theater, using Kathakali and Indian. She was very inspired. A lot of us in the 70s, 80s, 90s were looking to Asia for inspiration in the theater, or the Middle East. And I went and lived there for 4 years, but many people just were very inspired and dabbling. But I think Minushkin did great work. Peter Brook did great work in the theater a long time ago, early work. Now, I also love Theatre Complicité. Simon McBurney, who is an English performer and great director, and he went to mime school at Lecoq as well. So his theater is very visual, very physical, but it's also very intellectual. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's genius theater. And from time to time, Robert Lepage from Canada. He is incredibly imaginative. So all these directors are not just doing naturalistic theater. Yeah.
About costume designer, do you have some preference? You are the best.
No, I like designing costumes in the theater. I did the Magic Flute and co-designed the Green Bird, but I'm not doing it as much now because I'm in too many places at once. Film, I don't like to design the costumes because you can't do directing and designing. So I hire the best people. And every film I've done of the 4, the costume designer gets nominated for an Academy Award. All of them. Even when nobody else gets nominated. Every costume, Elena Candanero, Julie Weiss for Frida, Albert Wolski for Across the Universe, and Sandy Powell, who is the best in the world for The Tempest. So I work with people who are better than I am, and we have a great equality, and they like it because I know how to design costumes. I allow them to go very far. I'm not frightened of difficult costumes. It doesn't worry me. If I believe that it's right for the character and for the story, then go for it. And a lot of the design, I believe, is metaphorical for the character. It's not just clothing. It has to represent the personality of that. And Titus is the best example. Titus and Tempest are the best examples, So, if you saw Titus with Anthony Hopkins, Titus based on the Shakespeare play Titus Andronicus, what was fantastic about it in design, costume and music, also with music, but costume and sets, is it mixed period. You go to Rome and you see in that city ancient ruins. And in front of those ruins, in front of the Colosseum, you will see toy dolls that are wound up of gladiators, of Roman soldiers. But then motorcycles are going by, and then you'll see, it's such a blend of time if you go to Rome. And we're not doing Gladiator, so we're not going to use CGI and create ancient Rome. And also, if you read a Shakespeare play, he blended time. Titus is not historical. It has rituals of sacrifice, which is not Christian, pre-Christian. It is using Latin and Greek mythology mixed in with Roman history, mixed in with Elizabethan history, mixed in with contemporary Elizabethan ideas and philosophies. So if you look at woodcuts of how it might have been in Shakespeare's Elizabethan England, they would be wearing pantalon, like the Cervantes costumes or the pantalones, and then they would have togas. So even in his day, he blended time. So if you look at Titus the general, he comes in armor, and it's stylized, but it's based on Roman armor. And as he moves through the story, his costume goes from black to gray to white. And he becomes, as he loses his power, it becomes less hard as well, less formal. By the third scene, he's wearing a gray sweater and he's like an old uncle. He's lost his power. And by the end, where he's mad, he's wearing a white chef's hat and a chef's as he bakes 2 human beings into pies and feeds them to their mother. So his costume in the beginning, he's very much from the old world. Now, Alan Cumming played the mad emperor, Saturninus. And the building that you saw, the big square building, is called the Square Colosseum, with the black banners coming out. That was Mussolini's government palace. So we put Saturninus into a Mussolini era, and he's very much like a Tamara Lepica painting. It's actually a copy. But he and Jessica Lange's clothes were from the era of the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, the damned, very decadent. The way her hair is, and the tattoos and the clothing that she wore. So they were from that period. Then the daughter of Titus was a very good girl, Lavinia. And she always felt like she was a 1950s Grace Kelly, very sweet good girl with little gloves and the bell dress. But when she's raped and mutilated, you saw one scene there, she's in slips, and the image of the Marilyn Monroe with the skirt that flies up became the image. So again, the costumes were very much what was the essence, the ideograph, I call it. It's like a Japanese brush painting when you reduce it to what is the essence of that character in a few brush strokes. So if you gave a costume, how would you feel about that character by that costume? And that, I can go through every character and it would be the same, as well as in The Tempest.
Well, we're on Titus. Can you tell us why Titus is your favorite Shakespeare play?
Well, I say it's my favorite Shakespeare play. I love The Tempest as well, but what I love about Titus is people think it's a bad play. And yet in his own period of time, it was his most popular play because it was his Pulp Fiction. It was his revenge plays, and it was his first play, considered his first, and it has a raw, angry, young man's first work about it, young artist's first work. It's cynical, it sort of vomits his beliefs and his ideas about racism, and it's the greatest dissertation on violence, I think, ever written in any art form. He attacks and tackles war, rape, sacrifice, religious sacrifice, lust, that takes you right to murder. It's extraordinary, and yet it's done with love, and it's about the fact that anybody can become violent. It's not just about low-life gangsters and drug dealers, that they're violent. No, this is a good man, the general of your country, the man who could be your president or your king, and he starts as a good man, and by the end of that play, he murders, you saw those bodies hanging upside down, he kills the 2 boys who raped and violated, cut the tongue off of his daughter, and he bakes them into pies like Medea and feeds them to their mother. That journey, we love Titus in the beginning. I mean, we don't love him, but we understand him and we believe he's a good man. And then on the other hand, you have Aaron the Moor, the black character, who is loathed and hated, is very racist the way people treat him, and he starts out he's nihilistic. He'll kill, he knows that he's hated, so he has power and he exploits his power, but when he has a child, by the end, he will do anything for his blood child. He will die for his child. So if you see these pendulums going like that. And it's very disturbing and upsetting, and that's why people in the 19th century thought it was not a good play, not nice, not neat, messy. But to me it was so raw that it was like a pearl in an oyster. And if you could get at that pearl, it really would touch you.
How did a first-time film director manage to land actors such as Anthony Hopkins, Jessica Lange, and Alan Cumming in such an ambitious project as Titus?
Question? Comment? What's the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. How did you manage to convince them to join this project?
I think Shakespeare for really good actors is a draw. I do. I had no trouble getting Helen Mirren for Tempest, that lineup of those actors in The Tempest, Jaimin Hansu, Alfred Molina, Chris Cooper, David Strathairn. It's all great actors in that movie. And it is because we all know that in the English language, he's our greatest writer, and he will push actors and directors further than anybody else. What he demands, what he envisions, how much freedom he gives, and how much true layering of their characters. They're not black and white. You look at so many movies now, you know who the good guy is, you know who the bad guy is, you kind of know the story. You don't know that. When you're doing a Shakespeare play, especially something like Tempest and Titus, you think Prospero is a good person? You do, because his dukedom is taken away, and then look what he does. Look how he tortures Caliban. So you're conflicted, but for the actors, those actors, this allows them tremendous range. They're juicy, juicy parts. And also in both cases, these lead actors heard my concept, how I wanted to do Titus with Anthony Hopkins. He had seen The Lion King. He saw a director at work, and he liked the idea. He didn't want to do just a naturalistic Shakespeare film. He wanted it to be something that, you can't do a naturalistic Shakespeare film. The language is poetry. So if you're going to do the poetry, then the imagery has to match the language. There's no point if you're just going to do it naturalistically, because you have to actually even pay attention to the meter so that it can speak to the audience. If you do it with ums and ahs, you'll ruin it. So you can have it look, and the acting can be naturalistic to a degree. If you do Shakespeare really well, it'll be absolutely natural. But you have to learn it first. And I think, it's just something that a lot of young actors might be frightened to do it because they don't have you don't need training, but they're frightened of the language. But we were able to mix Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Matthew Rhys and a lot of young actors, Reeve Carney, who had never acted before, who plays Spider-Man. He's a rock singer. And I thought he'd be a perfect Ferdinand. He felt princely. And his audition was very good. So I think you don't have to be trained to do it, but you have to then have rehearsal and give time for the actors to explore those parts.
Can you please talk a little bit about the challenge of directing Anthony Hopkins?
You were there yesterday. Well, Hopkins is one of our greatest actors in the West, and he had been lauded for Silence of the Lambs, and I think post Silence of the Lambs he did a couple of so-so films, but he clearly hadn't been directed. And it was my first feature, so who am I to direct Anthony Hopkins? But on the other hand, I had directed the play. And I knew on the stage, and I knew Titus Andronicus, both Shakespeare's I had done in the theater first, which was very important to me, because I needed that time to absorb it and understand it in a minimalistic setting, on a stage with very little scenery. Then you really have to understand the play. So Hopkins was at a point in his life where he wasn't sure he ever wanted to act again. And playing the part of Titus, going mad, it really happened on the set. It really happened. And you could see it in the dailies, that he was Titus at a certain point. And it was scary on set, and it was a very noisy set because Italians are used to dubbing. So the whole crew didn't understand any of the English, so they'd be talking while actors are trying to do difficult English, Shakespeare. So there was a lot of silencio, a lot of, with people getting very uptight. We didn't have a great first AD, so it wasn't well controlled. It was a very difficult first feature. But, and as you said, awfully big to chew, you know, to try and do as your first. But I so what, you know? I had some good people around me. And the thing is that what I said yesterday to this young group of filmmakers is that we were really, you heard him say we had to duke it out or something. He said we had to, yeah, well, we never physically duked it out, but we were like two stones sometimes rubbing against each other. And the good part about that is that you create fire. And fire is illumination and inspiration and excitement. So I wouldn't say it was fun. I would say it was thoroughly inspiring, and every night when you, this is a good thing about film that I love, you could see it in the dailies and you went, oh my God, all right, let's go back in. And one time we had to do a reshoot with him. I'd never do reshoots in my movies because with the DP and the limited budgets or whatever it might be, you have to know ahead of time what you're trying to do, especially in a musical. You can't afford to just shoot, and then do it later in the cutting room. And I like to conceive it ahead of time with the DP and other people. So Hopkins was very worried to do the Shakespeare because he hates the Royal Shakespeare Company, National Theatres. What he says is the style of Shakespearean acting, where it's very, you know, he'd been doing movies for a while and he was nervous because he has one of these voices that can go in that direction. He was nervous that he was going to do that, and he said to me when I met him the first, to invite him to do the movie, he said, you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to help me, this is my first film. It's okay, we'll do it together. So when we rehearsed for 2.5 weeks, we had to rehearse in order, because this play is so emotional for the lead. His hand gets cut off, his daughter's raped, his kids are killed, you know, it's got so much deep, intense emotion that you have to know where are your highs, where are your peaks and valleys. So we rehearsed in order, and yet we shot out of order, and maybe in the second or third week we were already at the place where his hand gets chopped off, he's begging for the life of his sons come back to him, 2 heads and 2 bottles, you know, it's the most emotional place. And we shot it, and he underplayed it so much that I looked at the dailies that night and I went, this is not going to work, because it was he was so frightened of overacting, of being too big. And I went, oh God, all right. Ring, 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 hello, Tony? You know, I think we're gonna have to shoot that scene again. Really? He only does 1 take or 3 takes at the most. Yes? You know, I think we need another shot and we need to go to the height of it. And he said, I think I know. He was aware, and I think he was relieved that we gave him, because usually while you're shooting, you usually don't go back to the same set and do a reshoot, but we did it. And the next day, he went the other extreme. And it was so violent and so frightening, much of it very powerful. But the poor girl who was playing his daughter was practically strangled because he was holding on to her so tight, and she was like, I mean, much of that looks great in the movie, you know, but when we went to the editing room, my wonderful editor, Françoise Bonneau, had to take that monologue and piece by piece use the two versions so that it had a beautiful arc to it. And I don't think, honestly, any actor could have done what she ended up cutting together. I think it would have been very hard to get yourself into a head frame where he could have done that over and over again. So it's a pretty interesting scene, if you look at the movie, to watch that one monologue of him holding his daughter and talking about the weeping cloud, the weeping welkin, why we shouldn't rage, shouldn't I not rage when the sky cries, you know, when there's a storm, we too have to rage.
The opening sequence of that film reminds me, in terms of lighting and the movement of the soldiers, like almost like a Ray Hussein film.
What?
Ray Hussein. He did the
Harryhausen?
Harryhausen, sorry. And he kind of the jerky claymation. How did you achieve that, and what was the
concept behind the opening?
Yeah.
Well, I told you about the blending of time. And I thought that, which I think is very important to do in many works of art, works of theater, performance, movies, the game or the rules were set right at the opening. So in all of the armies coming back to Rome, which is the opening of the film, you have horses, you have chariots, you have motorcycles, you have a mixture of time, a glass box full of the gold, and everything is covered in clay. Actually, the inspiration was not Harryhausen, it was the Chinese soldiers that were buried under the ground, terracotta soldiers. So we shot this in Croatia because it's the only place where they have a Colosseum that's intact. The one in Rome didn't have a floor, and the one in Croatia, ironically, sadly and ironically, the symbol of the ultimate violence of humanity is the Colosseum, where people watch theater of cruelty. They watch it as entertainment. That was there, and it was very cold winter, and yet we had to cover everything with clay. And the clay unified all of those time periods. So that one color, and I'll tell you, everybody knew the idea, but once we were there shooting, everybody begged, do we have to put the clay? It's cold, it's cold. And that's when a director really has to, you say, well, but guys, don't you remember, if you don't do it, the entire concept is thrown out. So I think some of the designers really understood that, and the actors totally understood it. In fact, they liked it. Because being cold, having the clay, it actually helped where they had to be emotionally. They didn't complain about it at all. It was, it was just, are we going to, do this on all the extras? But it worked very well. And the movement is, yes, it's stylized. It's martial arts, but we made it up, and I wanted it to feel like a little bit the toy soldier coming alive.
It's in real time.
Absolutely, it's all real time. And those soldiers were in the army in Sarajevo, and they were, they were in policemen, and they learned the choreography very quickly. I mean, they were very disciplined. I don't know if I could have done it in Rome quite the same way, but these guys were very close to all of it.
Now we are talking about Frida and Mexico. Do you remember some similar ritualistic experience in Mexico while filming Frida? Something special like Indonesia?
Did experiences like Indonesia?
Yeah, something special like that night you were...
Oh, the night?
Yeah. Something to remember special with the people.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, it wasn't quite the same. I think that as an outsider, as an American coming to Mexico and seeing the Blue House and the way that Frida and Diego painted what they saw, and the color, just the intensity of... Here in Guanajuato, Elliot and I the first day went into the Mercado Hidalgo, and it's nothing like it, the voluptuousness of the color and the detail of everything, and the faces and the people and the families. This is very different than coming from New York, which is, I love New York, and it is colorful, but it's a little bit more gray, more black, white, gray, and I think as an outsider, we don't take all of that for granted, that I think more Mexicans would, that kind of color. It's shocking to us. And the music, that there's constant music everywhere. When we were working on Juan Darien, and we were in one town, I don't know if it was Oaxaca or another place, but we just sit out there listening to the piano or the guitars from a pub, from a tavern, playing music out of tune, piano, and then listening over here simultaneously. That was like Indonesia, where you hear this musician here in the square last night, 2 musicians in 2 different restaurants singing 2 different songs, battling with each other, and who's louder. There's something so vibrant, messy, and beautiful about that kind of thing, which is very different than our own. So we as outsiders see things that don't see anymore. And it would be the same if you came to New York. You would go, oh my God, look at that gargoyle up on that. We're looking down at the street. We're not looking up at the gargoyles. And the tourists are all, oh my God, like that. Well, this is the same. You know, we have that appreciation for things that are different.
Can you tell us a little bit about working with Rodrigo Prieto on that film?
Yes. Well, Rodrigo is my favorite DP, and I've asked him to do every single movie since Frida, but he's never been available. He always has Inarritu or somebody else to do. But he says he's going to do my next film. We'll see if the timing and the money works out. I think it was incredible to work with him. He manipulates the camera. He's an excellent camera operator. And what would happen when we were shooting was we would find, yes, there's the monitor, and he would be framing a shot, and I would start to make a move as if I was going to say something, and he would already done it. He and I see it the same way. We had a very good instant communication about framing, about camera movement, and we discussed the fact that he had just done Amores Perros, which is all very moving camera, handheld, and Frida is about a painter. And her paintings are portraits, and they're in small frames. And I said, you know, I know you're very good at camera movement, handheld, but this is not that kind of movie. It's got to have a certain kind of framing sometimes, and stillness, or we're going to do very controlled dolly movement, and he said, I agree completely. And when we used handheld camera, it was when Frida got furious because Diego, it was after the wedding, at the wedding party, and everybody's drunk and he's laughing. I don't know if you remember that scene. And so, of course, that's handheld. And that kind of moment, which is a violent, emotional moment, makes sense that the photography should be violent itself and feel unhinged and drunken. So we talked very clearly ahead of time about the style and the use and color. And we also did many tests because we couldn't go to, as I said, Paris and New York. We used color in those sequences. Paris, which was shot in Puebla, all the Art Nouveau, almost like New Orleans, you know, it has this beautiful ironwork we found in Puebla, and then the big hotel on the Zocalo in, I forgot the name, but Eiffel designed it. We used that, and we made all the color almost black and white or pastels. Very Art Nouveau, pastels and golds, warm. And New York was Art Deco, and it has a different kind of framing and a different quality of color, black, white, gray, silver, very Deco in that sense. So these things we did in experiments and tests before, and he's just great with the visual effects as well. There are not that many visual effects in Frida. The one of the painting where her hair is cut, that's not a visual effect. That's actually a forced perspective, real set. Salma is completely painted, her costume. There's no CGI, it's live and lit to look exactly like the painting. The only visual effect is motion control so that she could be looking in the mirror when the camera moves. So you have a Salma, Frida outside with the short hair, or the cutting of the hair, and Frida's inside the painting. But the rest we tried to do in camera as much as possible, and then we also use animation.
How did you come to direct Across the Universe? How did this project come to you?
Well, it wasn't my idea. I was working on another Beatles musical for the theater that wasn't going anywhere because the producer changed jobs. And I heard and found out that there was going to be a musical being made with the Beatles, and Joe Roth called me and said, would you be interested in directing? And there had been a treatment called All You Need Is Love, which was a terrible title. And I said, I'll do the movie, but you have to change the title, which wasn't an easy battle. It took months, 4 or 5 months. But I really meant it, because I feel that the song is great, it ends the movie, but it's too lightweight for the story of those times. And I think you have to have it at the end. So we started with that, knowing that there might be a different sensibility. But Dick Clements and Ian LaFrennay, who were the screenwriters, they're English, they're older English guys who are really the age of the Beatles. They weren't brought up in American culture, and their version in the treatment only had, they weren't called Jude, Lucy, or Max, they were other names. And there were 10 songs or so, very different songs. There were 2 or 3 that were the same that are in the movie, but Penny Lane, and a lot more of the movie was in England, and a lot more parents. So when I came in, I said, well, I have to be involved in the story, and I think it has to, because the 7 years of the Beatles' creations go from very innocent Beatles, like I Want to Hold Your Hand and All My Lovin' and Hold Me Tight. That's almost like the late 50s. The early 60s really feels like the late 50s. It's very naive America. Then the Vietnam War happens, and there's the draft, and the whole era of the 60s, as we all know it now, began. And the Beatles grew up as composers and lyricists during that time. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, their music radically changes with their use of drugs, with the war, with the protests, with the explosion in Mexico City, with the protests everywhere in Paris, Mexico, Japan, wherever it was. So I wanted the movie to have that kind of arc as well, that it would start with that sweetness, the high school sweetness. But I said we have to add 3 more characters. First of all, you have all 3 white young people, and you really must embrace the African-American music and characters, because the Beatles were very, very, let's say, inspired, but it's a little more than inspired, of Black American music. So, you know, the influence of, oh, darling, you know, all of that. It's really Black music. And they're very open about that, that's clear. There's so much respect for those incredible artists, Black artists, American artists. So they loved the idea, the producer and the writers, to add Sadie, JoJo, and Prudence. And I wanted to use the names of the songs because then I could use the songs. You know, how can you sing Hey Jude if Jude doesn't exist? Who is Jude? In a musical, part of it had to be literal. Some people object to that because they like their own, well, I don't know, isn't that, oh, cute, they have Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, but that was the end titles, or we didn't do all of them. We didn't have Sexy Sadie. But if you know the Beatles, you know that song. It's sort of there as out there in the background. But it really allowed us to use Dear Prudence or some of the other songs. Even as reference, Maxwell Anderson is a violent, raw guy in that song, so it was a good name for the character, Max. So I worked with the writers. I picked out of 200 songs, 30, and tried to weave the story around the songs. And the Beatles' lyrics, it's not really the Beatles, John and Paul's lyrics are so, it said it all. We had very little dialogue in that movie. It's all the story, like a traditional musical, all the story is told through the lyrics.
Can you please tell us a little bit of how you had to fight for the final cut on this film? And
yes.
What you went through?
Well, if you saw the movie, and I can't see you out there, but I'm hoping you all saw this, it has many styles, as I said, and some of it's very surrealistic, as would be appropriate during a drug time, an acid, LSD time. So when you saw Bono on the top of that bus singing I Am the Walrus, what the hell is that about anyway, I Am the Walrus? So it goes into a psychedelic. In fact, our kids were on LSD when we shot that. I didn't know that. I found out later. They thought that would be a very cute thing to get them in, you know. Thank God the scene worked, but I would not have approved. I don't think anybody would. So now you know a bit of trivia that hasn't really gone public. Twitter. At any rate, the movie had the Vietnamese ladies. It had a lot of political activism by Lucy. I think what happens in some of these projects that are pushing the envelope and trying to do things that haven't been done before or aren't normal or maybe a little confusing or, you know, we don't know. Sometimes producers get terrified, and I've had it happen more than once, not just across the universe, where they panic at the 11th hour. If there are 11.5 hours, they panic at the 11th. And all of a sudden, they also smell potential commercial value. They smell money. And they want to, this is a Hollywood story. It's happened to almost every director, where they want to then simplify or cut out the potential difficult parts. And I didn't have final cut, so it was a struggle. And what you see is my cut minus maybe 1 or 2 minutes, but basically it is. But then you win and you lose. And where we lost was that it was not really put out in America very well. It did well on DVD, but it was not advertised, and it was kind of sad because they found out later that especially young 15-year-old girls would see it 10, 20 times, and it did extremely well on DVD. So I think they missed it. It would be like with Lucy, she has a line, she's 15 years old and 16 years old, and she finds out that one of her friends is pregnant, and she says, "I'm never having children." And her other friend is, "Really? Why?" You know, this is early 60s. She says, "Oh, having children is so narcissistic. It's like putting out little carbon copies, carbon copies like Xerox, of ourselves." I remember very early, one of the first notes was, "Oh, that will make Lucy unlikable." And I went, "No, that'll make her likable. Because 15-year-old girls think like that." And you also have to remember, that's a girl who, when she's 18 or 19 or 20, is going to be Gloria Steinem. She's going to be a radical. She's going to be out there marching in the street, putting her body in front of a tank, protesting the Vietnam War. Where do you see the birth of that girl? So things like that got cut out of one of the versions that was cut behind my back, in that nice Hollywood style. And I fought, and my comrades, we fought, and we had a lot of support from Paul McCartney, Bono, many, many people. Sidney Lumet, who's not with us anymore, one of my favorite directors. And we got the film. Same with Frida. We got the film we wanted to make, but then sometimes it doesn't get as distributed in the way that it would have if they believed in it, right, totally.
What did the surviving Beatles think of the film?
What are the surviving Beatles? Well, all kinds of things. I think Ringo liked it. I never met him, but my young actors met him, and he said he liked it. And Olivia Harrison I met, she really liked it. And I sat next to Paul McCartney in London, just right, he was here, I was here, and I was very nervous that he saw the cut that they had seen, Yoko Ono had seen, but I didn't know whether that cut would last, but he didn't know that it wouldn't. So he watched it with fresh eyes, and probably thinking you would hate it. And early in the movie, Jude sings "All My Lovin'," and Paul McCartney started to sing under his breath, "All My Lovin'." I don't know if his head moved, but I died because it's Paul McCartney. And I'm a 12-year-old girl. This film is very much based on my older brother and sister, and a little bit on my family, a lot on my family. It's the most personal film that way. My parents went through that time with my older brother and sister through draft and radical and politics and everything, and drugs. And I'm the little blonde girl who opens the door and watches what goes on. So I was blown away, and then at the end of the movie, because I was so insecure about the cut, I said, "Well, what didn't you like about the movie?" And Elliot reminded me, says, "What's not to like?" So, you have Paul McCartney saying that, and then you go home and do this major battle for 8 months, of trying to keep the movie that Yoko liked the movie too. The only thing she objected to was I Want You, because I Want You, which is my favorite one, that's the one with Uncle Sam reaching out and the Statue of Liberty, because she said that song was written about her. So I said yes, it's about love as well, because at the end of the song, Sadie's singing it to JoJo and Prudence is singing it to Sadie. So it is really sexual and about love as well. But that was her complaint. I think she liked it as well. It was great. I wanted them to approve it. They didn't have to. It was important to me and the other artists who created it that we were doing them well. We wanted them to feel that we had done justice to their songs.
It's interesting that you chose to adapt Shakespeare's first play, which is Titus, and then also his last play, which is The Tempest. Is there any particular reason? Is that a coincidence?
Well, The Tempest happens to be the first Shakespeare that I directed on stage, and I did it 3 times. And as I said up there on the screen, when Shakespeare wrote The Tempest, it was at a time, his original theater, the Globe Theater, was outdoors. And there was no lighting. It was daylight. And he wrote a play that was perfect because people were starting to move indoors. And they created the new theater. I'm bad memory for the name, but where they had the potential of lighting. They had potential of theatrical visual effects. With stage, of course it's flames, but they could do it. What?
Globe?
No, the Globe was exterior, and the Globe did not use lighting. It was during the day. They went into theaters like this, and they were able to do sleight of hand tricks, and they were able to make scenery move and have oceans, old-time theatrical techniques. So he really created a play about magic. It's about a sorcerer. Ours is a sorceress, but it is about that. And it has so much magic. It has been adapted into film, but not. They've all been auteur directors' own takes, really own takes, like Peter Greenaway's Prospero's book. It's not really The Tempest. The only person who speaks is John Gielgud. It's really, what did I just say directed it? Peter Greenaway's, his take. And then another one, Derek Jarman, also very different than the Shakespeare. So I felt, having done the play, that I could do it, the real Shakespeare, on an island. We shot in Lanai in Hawaii, and do the magic and use him, as I said. He wrote the visual effects. So Ariel, how do you do Ariel? I did it very differently in the theater. My Caliban and Ariel in particular were done in highly theatrical ways in the theater with a puppet head that moved. But knowing I was going to want to see an actor's face, Ben Whishaw, who plays Ariel, I wanted it to be transparent, but human. Wanted that duality of the spirit, but the humanity. You saw the scene where he says, I would have compassion were I human. It's very moving because that's the one scene where he's really physical, where he's not transparent. He's more human in that scene than any other. The rest, he transforms. He plays the harpy. And I knew I could have fun techniques in theater, in film to do that. It was also inspired, the film, by, bad name, but the photographer who did the horses like that, the multiple photography. What? Muybridge. Thank you, out there. Thank you. So, Muybridge, yes, that was the idea of having that, those trailing images as he moved along. The Tempest is Shakespeare's last play, considered his last solely written play, and it's a farewell to the theater. And Elliot later, I'll let Elliot talk about how he worked the music, because he'll talk about many of the things, projects, but he'll do it from a composer from his point of view, so I won't go over that. But the interesting thing is why Helen Mirren. I had done it in the theater 3 times with a male actor, great New York stage actor, Robert Stadel. When I thought about doing the movie, I thought about who do I want, and yes, Daniel Day-Lewis came to my mind, and I think he would have been great. I didn't ask him, but beyond him, I wanted to work with the likes of Meryl Streep or Judi Dench or Helen Mirren. And there are no Shakespeare roles for women of that age, as we know. The women were played by men, and usually they were younger parts. So there aren't. Tamara, which Jessica Lange plays, has a baby. So even that limits how old the character is. So I thought a lot about this play, and at the time I ran into Helen Mirren. She had just done The Queen, and she's astonishing in The Queen and everything else. She'd done another Elizabeth. And we were at a Directors Guild party, and I had already been thinking of casting her, or Meryl, or somebody like that, in the role. And I didn't tell her that, but she had seen Titus, and we were talking about Shakespeare, and her first role in the theater was Caliban. She played Caliban at age 20 or something. Sexy Caliban. And sexy Caliban. And she's done, so many Shakespearean roles. And we talked and lamented about the fact that these older women, great actresses, don't have the opportunity. Not all the plays. King Lear, it can. It doesn't necessarily work. But this play does work with a woman. And she brought it up. I was thinking, and she said, I could play Prospero. I don't know if she immediately was thinking as a man or as a woman, but I think it was as a woman, because I wasn't thinking about her playing it as a man. Vanessa Redgrave did that. Other people have done that, but I wanted to really see it work as a mother, as a duchess, as a duke. Women were dukes during that time, could be dukes. So she said I could do that, and immediately all the other actresses disappeared from my mind. And I said, do you want to? And she said, really? She thought I meant theater, and I meant film, and she said yes. So 1 year later, we were making it. What we did, though, was we did a reading in LA first, with actors around the table, changing the he's to she's, the Lord to mum and ma'am, and I didn't want to do it without testing it out, the script. And there's one passage in the movie that is not Shakespeare, that was created. It's the backstory of what happened. It's written in verse, and it's very well done, but it was added, and the backstory works very well as a woman, because women were convicted as witches and sorceresses and burned at the stake. So the story is when she feels that she's a white magic and she's now manipulating and using black magic, that conflict is very powerful. And also one of the big speeches in the research I did, the scene that you saw where she's making a circle of fire, and she's going to give up her magic at that point. She's going to release her enemies from the curse that she's put upon them. That speech, for all you theater people, ye elves of hills, dales, standing brooks and groves, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, I have done this, I brought raging war. It's a great speech. Shakespeare lifted it from Ovid's Metamorphoses, and it was from the mouth of Medea. It is a witch's speech. So originally belonged to a woman. So we felt, that's pretty good. You know, we got there, put it back into the mouth of a woman. But it's not like this is a feminist track. I feel good about the word feminist, but I think it's been misused as if it's anti-male. Not at all. This play works both ways. It's just different. So I think that it was very exciting to see a mother protecting her daughter against the young prince, as opposed to that father who has competition with the young prince who comes to take his daughter, a lot of testosterone there. The mother is protecting her daughter because she knows what these young guys will do. She knows. So it really was exciting to discover the power of the language in a woman's mouth.
Talking about Helen Mirren, she said in your film, talk about the perfection of that beautiful island.
Landscape, yeah.
Landscape. So, to you, what is perfection? Does beauty mean perfection?
Well, we all know that ugliness is beauty, and vice versa. So, the perfection is that we found an island, Lanai, a very small island in Hawaii. So it's, America, it's the United States, with a lot of native people who do not believe that, and who have very powerful spirits who guard it, and we did respect that. And they were very happy to have the Tempest there, as opposed to Lost or Hawaii Five-0 or Meeting Sarah Marshall or whatever it is. It was nice to have the Tempest there. The thing about that island of Lanai for a filmmaker with limited budget and limited time is you saw the landscapes. We could go 20 minutes away by car. You could have unbelievable gnarled trees or that extraordinary red sand land. It's called Garden of the Gods. And there are all these giant rocks. That's where Caliban carries the wood. And it looks like you're on Mars. It's huge old rocks that you don't know how they got there. And then we went to the Big Island for all that black, endless volcanic nature, raw nature, as I said, just so perfect, because the play in its essence is about nature versus nurture. What is natural and what is civilization. The very first image on the hand palm of that young Miranda, who's been brought up, she was brought to the island at 3 months, 3 years, excuse me, and she's been there for 12 years to go. She has a sandcastle in her hand. That's all she knows of civilization. She knows about civilization from the stories in the books that her mother brought on that bark, on that raft that they came to the island when they were set adrift in the sea. And what you see right at the beginning is the Tempest. So that's not how the play begins normally. But you see it right at the beginning, that nature will destroy that castle. As the rains fall, the castle drips out of her hand, and you cut to the ship and this Tempest. So the way that I work with landscape is the way that I described with the costumes. Each landscape that I chose represented the inner landscape that is going on in the characters. One of the hardest landscapes to find, the scene where Miranda falls in love with Ferdinand, the young prince, who's shipwrecked. I had been inspired by a Japanese film called Woman in the Dunes, where two young lovers were put down in the base of a sand dune as the villagers sat at the top and forced them to make love. They were in this crevice, this really sexual image of this dune, and they couldn't get out. There was something about putting these two lovers at the base of this ravine that was glowing with red. It was a glowing red, orange, beautiful from the sunlight. It's all natural. 90% of that film was shot at exterior. So, except when it got a little dark and we had to use lights, you didn't use lights. You had to be the DP had to be very sensitive to how we use the sun. And that landscape with Prospero up on the ridge, looking down at these two who couldn't help but fall in love. That represented it. Or the landscape that's all gnarled trees was during the scene where Stefano and Trinculo, Alfred Molina and Russell Brand are the two drunken court jester and butler, and the trees, they're lost in this forest that's like Hansel and Gretel. It's all gnarled, so it worked perfectly for their inside. Or the conspiracy scene where ironwood trees, which are very straight, and you get lost. You can move around them and hide behind them, but it is a labyrinth. So each piece of land wasn't just because it was pretty or ugly, it was because it was the essence of what the scene was about.
Yeah, but which elements have to have something to be beauty? Or, yeah.
What is beauty?
Yeah.
I don't know. Beauty, I think, makes the viewer. I've never answered this before, so I'm just.
That's good. That's good.
It makes the viewer full of a sense of awe. AWE, awe. It's like when you walk into this theater, you go. You don't do that on an iPad very often. And the reason we like, as film directors, still like movie theaters is because scale helps. Scale helps. But beauty is something that is, it's like the most supreme of what the imagination or nature could conceive. I don't know, I think there are many things about beauty, but it has to really touch you deeply. It has to, oh my God, one of our jurors yesterday said one of the movies, every scene, I'm sorry to reveal this, but I mean, scratched the heart, you know, scratched the heart. Beautiful line. And a beautiful line. I heard the word scratch the heart, that was beauty. Because instantly the image combined with the pain and yet the beauty of the words, the juxtaposition, odd juxtaposition, the collision of a beautiful young girl in a nasty-ass environment. I think the scene of Lavinia on that it's one of the best scenes and most memorable scenes in Titus, is Lavinia, who's been raped. Shakespeare writes, what Shakespeare wrote was, you know she's going to get raped and mutilated, but he doesn't do it on stage. Neither did I. It's off stage, off camera. But the result is on stage, a vista, you see it. And in the theater, I had the young actress on a cut-off column, like a Roman column. And she was in her petticoats and in very Buto, Japanese style, which is also a beautiful, it's taking the grotesque and seeing beauty in the grotesque. Her white skin had a red line down. And we wrapped her hands in black and stuck twigs. When I went to do the movie, that was too stylized for the movie. So I looked for the metaphorical, that ideograph again, equivalent of what the cut-off column was. And it came from the language of Shakespeare. Her uncle says, when he sees her in the distance, oh my God, is this my niece? I'm paraphrasing Shakespeare. What has happened? Basically, who has lopped and hewed, meaning cut off, lopped is cutting off, and hewed, you hew a tree, you chop a tree down. Who has lopped and hewed and made thy body bare of her two branches? So, as a director, I go, oh my God, That's what it should look like. She's a tree. His poetry, his visual imagery is why I, the director, came up with this idea. And I thought, well, what landscape would represent the state of being raped and mutilated? And it was a swamp. A swamp that had a forest, that had a forest that was burnt down. So in the movie you saw she was put by the young boys who did this deed, put on that broken trunk, you know, that tree that had been burned down, and we used blue screen on her hands and stuck the twigs. It was if they, you know, you're not going to have her hands cut off and just bleed. When Marty Scorsese saw the movie, he said that scene was the most amazing. He said, if I directed that scene, you know, and I'm going to do Woody Allen, I don't know, but I would have, you know, her hands would have been cut off and she would have bled. And I said, yes, and she would have died. And then there'd be no more story. So there's partly the beauty and the inspiration, and there's the other practical matter. She can't die. So by putting her up on that pedestal, or the cut-off trunk, it also allowed the uncle who has a long monologue, she doesn't run away. She can't run away. She's stuck there. So there's many practical reasons for putting her there. But back to the idea of what was the setting, that was the best setting to represent, and these boys are in the mud, and that mud is what they've done to her. Her shame, and she's wearing white, and her petticoats and her beauty is just all devastated.
Thank you. Given your experiences doing independent films and then doing studio film
Across
the universe,
yeah.
what do you plan for the next project and in the future? How do you think you're going to move forward in terms of how you're going to pick your projects?
Well, I've always liked to pick my own, but Frida was not my project, and Across the Universe really wasn't either. They become your projects. And I did them because they were really exciting. But rarely does that happen. Rarely does a director get something that they haven't, I think, or at least for me, and I would say probably for most of the directors who come to these festivals, would say they're not really going to get scripts. They're going to generate scripts. They're going to find a book or have an idea, or maybe someone who knows them well will say, this would be good for you. So Elliot and I are working on a movie musical called The Transposed Heads, which we've done. I did as theater before I even met him. We did it as a musical in New York City, and now we're doing a movie musical. But it's an independent film. And we are still raising the money. It'll be New York City, contemporary India, and mythological, surrealistic India. And then the other film I want to make, I have a very good script, and the budget is a little high for an independent film. So I'm having trouble raising the money at this point. So you have difficulty, and there's a middle range for filmmakers. You know, you either have the low budget, under 15 or under 10, or over 70. I mean, there's a kind of very big problem now for movies that are in that middle territory. And movies that have visual effects, or, you know, are period movies, or are on the sea, which this other movie is, all three of those. It mixes periods, it's got ships, it's on the open ocean, and, you know, it has visual effects. It's very hard to say that you can do that well on that low a limited budget. So I'm not sure if I'm going to get it made. So I have, you know, 4 or 5 of the beautiful Juan Darien, the one that we did as theater and toured all over the world and won many awards. Elliot and I do have a film script. It's all in Latin and Spanish, and we would like to do that. So we put it away for a while. We know it can be made into a film. It's very magical, realistic. It's wild story, Quiroga story from Uruguay, but we worked on it in Mexico, so it's very inspired by Mexican iconography and imagery.
Okay. The last question. What would you like to do that you haven't already done? Maybe go.
Let me think. Fly out of it. I mean, there are many things I'd like to do, but in the art world, you mean like in the art world?
I don't know.
But I'm not going to talk about all those other secret things. But I think Lion King was so special in that I had tremendous freedom to take world theater, my background, and mix it with highly commercial material, Disney. And it has, yes, Elton John, very pop music from the West, but it also has music that is by Lebo M, South African music, that is in 4 or 5 languages. And it's commercial. And I have this still belief, even though I've had some difficult times, I still believe audiences in a commercial environment can still see things that really push the envelope. So something that I would like to do very much, one of the things you saw was an opera that Elliot and I did called Grendel. And we don't have good imagery from it yet. We don't have film. We're making a recording now. When I was in my teens, people made opera movies. Now, Magic Flute was the first high-definition live production from the Met. So, and Oedipus Rex was an opera movie, but it was shot on the stage. You can buy that. It's commercially, we shot it like a movie, 5 days, single camera. It wasn't shot live. It was shot as a movie and edited later. So I have had 2 of my opera productions done, but what I want to do is take Grendel and shoot on location and mix as Tolkien, as The Hobbit, or Lord of the Rings, or, I believe in this opera, and I believe that there is an audience for opera, new opera, but I might not be right, but I sense that there is always a new audience. So I haven't done it. I really want to do Grendel because everybody loves these monster stories. We're all doing these hero Thor and all these comic book, and I've done it. I've done the comic book, but I think telling it from the monster's point of view has such a contemporary, fun, cynical, moving way to tell these old legends that I think it would appeal to a very young audience. It did in the theater. When we did the opera in LA and New York, young people who had never seen opera really dug it. So I would like to do an opera film, not just in the theater. I don't want to just shoot it in the theater. I want to go out and shoot it in ice flows and caves and also use green screen and create giant dragons that sing.
Muchísimas gracias, Julie.